In the village of Obodo lived a girl named Pat. She was a very slim and beautiful girl, and she cooked delicious food. Because of how skinny and tall she was, people in Obodo village called her Lepa, the magic hand. Lepa means someone very slim or thin. Pat is a very young, beautiful and hardworking girl, full of life. Her cooking skills were the best in the village. The people know her for her cooking skills and always call her for any cooking festivals to taste her food and talk about her. Everyone in the village of Obodo talks about her and her magic hand. All the mothers, fathers and brothers always use her as an example to all the maidens of the village. She was always selected for all the cooking festivals in the village and nearby villages, even the king and queen's birthday parties. She was the talk of her village. Even the nearby villages always come for her services. Pat has a friend called Lily. Lily was Pat's childhood friend. They grew up together, played and talked about everything with each other, and people in the village see them as twins from different mothers. Pat and Lily started cooking at age 12. They both learned how to cook from Pat's mother. But Pat was the one with the magic hand. She got her cooking skills from her grandmother. Pat's grandmother used to cook in the palace for the late king. One faithful day, the news spread around the village that the prince was coming back from the big city. The king and all the queens were preparing for the arrival of the prince. They asked the servant to tell the town crier to make the announcement to all the villagers to gather on the next market day for the arrival of Prince Daniel. The villagers were preparing for the prince's arrival, boys, girls, fathers and mothers of the village. The king sent for Pat and asked her to cook her best recipe for the arrival of his son, Prince Daniel, and told her to make enough food that would feed the whole village on that day. Pat was so excited and went back home to tell her mother and friend. They were all happy. Pat and Lily started preparation for the big day, and the king sent his servants to help with everything she needed. As Prince Daniel arrived, he was so happy to see all the villagers waiting at the village square with dancers, drummers and singers, waiting to welcome him back home. They all followed him to the palace where King Abuka, his father, Queen Anna, his mother, and the other 3 queens, his stepmothers, were all waiting for his arrival. After the warm welcome from the villagers and his parent, it was now time to eat. Everybody ate, drank, and enjoyed themselves, and the villagers talked about the food. Some even wanted more of the food and sing praises to Pat for her cooking skills. When Prince Daniel tasted the food, he was so surprised and happy and asked the father who prepared the food. The king answered and said Pat with the magic hand. After the party that night, the next morning, everyone started talking about the celebration and Pat's food, even at the market, at home, farm, and on the roads. So, the event was the most talked about in the town for days. So, one day the prince was taking a walk around the village and heard some group of villagers discussing the new yam festival and talking about Pat and her magic hand. The prince decided to visit Pat and asked the servant to take him to Pat's home. But when they got there, Pat was not home. It was Pat's mother who was home. And the prince greeted her and asked after Pat. But Pat wasn't home. The prince dropped a message that when Pat returned home, he would like to see her. Pat and her friend came back together, and her mother told them how the prince visited that day and asked to see Pat. Pat was so happy that she wanted to go to the palace, but her mother said, "Tomorrow you can go see him." Lily was very jealous of Pat, and when Lily got back home, she was unhappy and jealous of Pat. She said she was always with Pat in all her cooking events and nobody sang her praises. She was very angry and jealous of Pat. The next morning, Pat came to Lily and asked to follow her to the palace to see Prince Daniel. They both went to the palace, and the prince was so excited to finally meet with Pat the magic hand. He was so surprised to see how beautiful she looked in person. He said to himself, "How can a girl be this perfect, with her long hair, brown eyes, slim, tall, and above all she is the best cook in the village?" So the prince was attracted to her, and fell in love with Pat on the spot. So the prince started visiting Pat and sending things to her home. This made Lily very uncomfortable with the idea of Pat visiting the palace very often. So she told Pat to stop going to the palace to visit the prince, that it would make her look uncultured. So Pat agreed with Lily and stopped going to the palace. Any time the prince sent for her, she refused to go. Even when the prince came to see her, she avoided him and hid until the prince left. When the prince got to the palace, he told his mother about Pat and how she had been avoiding him for some weeks now. So the mother came up with an idea on how to see Pat. After 2 days, the queen sent the servant to tell Pat that the king wanted her to come so they could discuss the next new yam festival cooking. Pat went to the palace with the servant that morning. When the prince sighted Pat, he was very happy and ran to meet her with a smile on his face, saying finally, "I can now see you." Pat was very surprised to know that it was the prince who sent for her to come to the palace. The prince and Pat had a very long and private discussion for the first time without her friend or the palace guard. The prince told Pat how he felt about her and how he wanted her to be the mother of his kids. Pat was very surprised to what the prince said to her. It was like a dream to her, but she didn't know what to say, so she ran out of the palace to her friend's place and told her the big news. Lily was very surprised and was thinking, how can the prince marry a nobody just like that? Or is she dreaming or something? So she was very uncomfortable with the fact that Prince Daniel likes Pat and was so jealous of her friend. And very soon, she will become the princess of Obodo village. Imagine Pat a nobody. So she asked her friend not to accept the prince's proposal, and she told her friend that the prince might be using her. Lily told Pat, "My friend, you know you are not just a friend to me. We grew up together, so you are my sister, and am ready to protect you from bad men like Prince Daniel. My friend, think about it. All these years, Prince Daniel stayed in the city. You think he didn't meet those beautiful city's girls and dated some of them, or left one in the city where he is coming from? Pat, my sister, believe me, because I can see through men like Prince Daniel. I know the prince is just using you, and the prince will leave you when he gets back to the big city." So, when Pat got home, she started thinking of what Lily said to her. She could not sleep all through the night, and she was very worried because she had also fallen in love with the prince, saying to herself, what if the prince left for the big city and abandoned her, and the villagers will start laughing at her? So, she decided not to accept the prince's proposal. The next morning, Pat went to Lily's house and told her that she would not accept the prince's proposal and that tomorrow she would let him know about her decisions. The next morning, she visited the palace and told the prince about her discussion, but the prince asked her why she didn't accept him, and she replied and said she was a nobody and he was royalty. But the prince said he didn't care and that he was free to marry any maiden of his choice, and that he will tell his father of his discussion. "And assure Pat that everything will be fine as long as I have you in my life." He then kissed her. Pat was so happy and was just thinking of how the prince gave her a kiss, thinking all through about the kiss. The prince told his father he had chosen the woman he wanted to marry. So the king asks his son, who is the woman, so they can send a message to the house of the maiden. The prince then told his father that it was Pat, the magic hand, and the father was so happy with his son for making the right choice, and told his son about the connection of both families from the grandmother of Pat to his grandfather. So the king sent a message to the house of Pat and told them that they would be coming for the marriage rite on the 4th of market day after the New Yam festival. When Lily had the news, she was very unhappy that her plan failed and was very jealous of her friend. On the 4th market day, the villagers were preparing for the marriage of Pat and their prince, dancing, singing, drums, and music in Pat's compound. Everybody was excited about the marriage ceremony. So Pat was now the prince's wife, and they were very happy living together in the palace. Pat was always sending things to Lily and always visiting her from time to time, but Lily was not happy with the new development of her friend. She wanted the queen position for herself. Months later, Pat was pregnant for the prince. She shared the good news with her friend, but her friend was not happy with the news, so she decided that it was time to do something about Pat getting what she ever wanted all this while. So, she started plotting evil things in her mind against her friend, Princess Pat. A few months gone, there was a playtime story that Pat and Lily always go and listen to in the next village, where an old lady tells them stories from the past. So, Lily came up with the idea that they visit that place as usual. Pat told her husband about it, and the prince allowed her on one condition, that she must take the guard with them. Pat and Lily set off on the journey to listen to the old woman, but Lily was busy plotting her evil deeds to get rid of Pat's baby.